So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that my group has done on the characterization of nanomaterials with an eye on existing regulations. So we're going to go through nanomaterials and what do they mean in terms of definition. For the purpose of regulation, we are going to look at how those regulations really drive the analytical developments that we can see nowadays. The techniques which are available there, we're going to see a snapshot of them, and all the efforts put into ISO standards, into documentary standards, into reference materials for which we have very, very limited amount of them in the market. And then I'm going to talk about a practical example of work in my laboratory about the characterization of silver nanoparticles, which are antibacterial nanoparticles used in medical devices. So we have a long contract with medical device industry, and that industry has to comply with regulation and with FDA regulation as well. So we help them, with the characterization of their medical devices used here using the hospitals across the UK. When we talk about nanomaterials, and I am on my third slide now, I hope that they are moving and you can see them. So when we talk about nanomaterials, we know that they are being used in many aspects of our life. They are added to food to change food properties. They are added into cosmetics. They are added in electronics, in the building industry, as advanced materials. And so they are everywhere in our lives. And according to the European recommendation in 2011, they claimed that a nanomaterial is that for which 50% of more of the particles are within the size between 1 and 100 nanometer. So when you look at this definition, then you might wonder, what is what we need to be measuring? Because regulations are a boring thing, but they are there for something. And based on the wording of the regulation is when we are driven to develop analytical methods to help industry to comply with them as well. So from this, we realize that number concentration is a very important parameter, yes? But also size distribution is very important for the identification of nanomaterials, and mass concentration is extremely important for future risk assessment as well. So as I said before, having methods for number concentration is extremely important to industry to comply with all these regulatory aspects and barriers. And of course, they are after us. They are collaborating with us, and they knock on our door to know what do we have in hand that can help them to get through the compliance as well. I would like to call your attention to the bottom of the slide. And this is a fantastic report. This is a policy report that was released by JRC, the Joint Research Center in Geel in Belgium. And it tells you exactly, based on that definition and with relation to regulation, which are the parameters that you should be looking at when you want to identify a nanomaterial and when you want to characterize it in a complex sample. So it's a fantastic report. I'm happy to share the slides later on. I can send my slides to Professor Arruda, and then he can share them with you if you are interested. But this is a very good report to look at. Because I cannot see you, Marco. Are my slides moving, and can you hear me well? Hello? Hello?
Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Can you?
Yes.
You can see
the
me, yeah?
It's working. It's working.
Fantastic.
No
Thank you very much. I cannot see anybody,
thank
and it's very quiet, everything, so
yes.
I wasn't sure. Yeah, good.
Okay.
Thank you. So what happened? What happened very recently in 2020 in June? This European recommendation, or that the European definition of nanomaterial completely changed. Or did not completely change. There were many aspects that were kept, but there are new aspects that are really, really new, and we have to take them into account. We have to take them into account because that changes the way we see nanomaterials, the way we need to be characterizing them and developing methods for them. So many of the experts, the expert of 50% of the particles between 1 and 100 nanometers, that remains intact. But as you can see here, the new definition is excluding non-solids like liquids or gases, particles like micelles or droplets as well in emulsions. It states that the additives of solvent present in the sample, they are part of the nanomaterial, but should not be taken into account when you assess whether there is a nanomaterial or not. So you don't take into account the solvent or the media. looks very much after surface area. Surface area has become a very important parameter for the definition of nanomaterial, and it's replacing carbon nanotubes with nanorods and nanofibers and nanoplates as well. So these things, we have to know them. We have to know them because all these new definition is going to impact the way we look at the regulations and the existing legislation in the area of cosmetic, novel foods, packaging, and everything else as well. And of course, this call for the need for detection and characterization methods, for characterizing nanomaterials in real samples, in complex samples. Materials in complex samples are very, very little. They are always on the order of smaller than 10 nanometers. When the matrix is there, we have to pay lots of attention to sample preparation techniques to extract them from the matrix without changing them. Or at least we need to know how much have we changed them as well. So metrology, many years ago, was focusing only on nanomaterials and their physical properties only in the solid state. But for the past 10 years, many groups, including ours as well, have put lots of effort in developing methods that can look at them as pristine materials in solutions, but also that can look at them and characterize them in complex samples like food and cosmetics, for example. We need traceability, we need comparability on this area, and we need more reference materials. There are practically no reference materials on this area, so there is no way to validate the methods that we have. The only way is to compare against each other, between different labs, or to have a platform of techniques that look at the same property, and then you can compare the different techniques to look at one property as well. And here at the bottom of the slide, I call your attention to another of those policy reports. And this one is fantastic. It's like really telling you, if you want to identify nanomaterials through measurements, which are the points that you have to consider in the assessment of particulate materials according to that definition of nanomaterial. So I read very much those reports to guide me, give me a guidance of what should we be developing in our lab as well. This is a snapshot, an overview of the different nano objects out there, but also the analytical techniques on the right-hand side of the slide. You can see that you have fractionation techniques. They are extremely valuable when you have polydispersity and mixtures of nanomaterials. So field flow fractionation is one of them that gives you an idea of size and size distribution. And if you combine it with elemental detectors, you can determine the elemental composition in different fractions. You have hydrodynamic chromatography, the filtration techniques and dialysis as well. And there you have a range of detection techniques that look at different properties of nanomaterials. The ones in red are the ones that we have in our labs nowadays. So we have a nice combination, a nice platform, including field flow fractionation as a separator, which we coupled with light scattering, multi-angle, static and dynamic light scattering with particle tracking analysis, looking at size, distribution, and number concentration. And we have access to electron microscopy. We don't have it in the building, but through collaborations as well. So again, no one can have this big range of techniques on their own, but this emphasizes the importance of collaboration on this area, So over the years, there are some ISO committees that look at how to provide guidance to people. And then here I would like to highlight some guidance documents that I find very, very interesting. Like the first one comes from the ISO TC 229 committee that was released in 2012. And it's listing the parameters that you should be looking at when you characterize nanomaterials, But then you have a technical specification from CEN, the second bullet point, and it's providing a guidance on what do you have to do when you would like to detect and identify nano objects in complex matrices. I found that very, very interesting as well. And again, we are doing metrology, and metrology is quality of measurement, it's the science of measurement. We are all trying to put our efforts, our heads together in how do we better measure nanomaterials with high accuracy and with very, very little error or uncertainty as well. So here, this is a list which is extremely important to look at. It's a list of standard documents which are out there. One is about vocabulary, if you want to learn a little bit more, but the others are about analytical techniques, and there are a million of those standards out there, but I just listed here what might be relevant to this community. There is one dedicated to single particle inductively cold plasma mass spectrometry, SPICPMS, which is a technique that has developed over the past 10 years very much to determine the number, concentration, and the relative size of nanomaterials. This is being under revision at the moment. The reviewed version of this standard is led by my colleague Dorota BrJAC, is a member of my group, and she's leading on the revision of this standard. But then we have other standards dedicated to what to do when you measure using asymmetrical flow and centrifugal field flow fractionation, when you're using many other techniques like particle tracking analysis, and I welcome you. I invite you to read these standards if you have access to them, because they provide lots of fantastic guidance, in your measurements. Moving into application areas now, areas which are extremely important and that use nanomaterials, and areas which are important to human health, are consumer products. So we have foods. Nanomaterials have been used as food additives for many, many years. They are used to reduce the content of salt, sugar, and fat without affecting the taste of your food. But I'm sure that when you go to the supermarket, if you look at the labels of your food, sometimes it's written there silicon dioxide or titanium dioxide, but there is nothing else written on the label. Here in Europe now, companies that produce food that incorporate nanomaterials, they have to write nano between brackets. And most of these food, they will have silicon dioxide, which is an anti-caking compound, just to allow for example, the spices and the solids to produce better emulsions in the food so that the food looks better, But you have titanium dioxide as well, which is a whitener, the white color that you see, for example, in coffee creamers that are very much used in Brazil and in the US as well. All these coffee creamers that you put in your coffee in the morning will have a huge amount of part per millions of titanium dioxide nanoparticles. And that's why it's important to look at all of these in food as well, Nanoparticles have been used to improve the property of food, but they are very, very little things. They have got a large surface area. They can penetrate your membranes and they could be toxic. And that's why we have to be looking after them, When you look at nano as a food additive as well, you have there a list of regulations, which I'm not going to read through, but it's very informative to know that here in Europe, again, as I said before, companies are forced or encouraged to write nano between brackets when they have added nanomaterials to the food. But then you have regulation 2015-283 that says that food consisting of engineered nanomaterials are in the list of criteria to be considered as novel foods, and they have to be properly characterized before they go into the market. So again, all of this is calling for better methodologies to analyze nanomaterials. And the last regulation that is listed here is talking about ensuring a high level of protection of human health and consumer for those foods consistent engineered nanomaterials that really needs to be characterized on this legislation as well. So again, the call for methodologies. We're moving now into the cosmetic area. The cosmetic regulation here in Europe is really, really, really strong. I don't know how is it in Brazil, how the regulatory aspects of nanomaterials are handled in your country. I'm not sure. But here in Europe, the cosmetic regulation that you can see on the screen is very strong in guiding industry to which are the properties that they need to be measured in their products. To be honest, I don't think that all the industry here in Europe are looking at these properties, and there is no transparency. Industry do not like to talk about these things. When you engage with them, these stakeholders do not open up. They don't tell you very much of what they do in their lab and what do they control really. But these products are out there, and that's a problem. So you can see there, zinc oxide nanoparticles are very much regulated in cosmetics. They are a UV screener. So all this for ladies and also men nowadays, they use creams in their face, in their hands, and they have got SP protection factors. That's done by the addition of zinc oxide and titanium dioxide. They use UV filters, you know what I mean? And they protect your skin and your body as well. So look at the amount of parameters that this industry has been asked to measure, and it's very important for them to have methods that work and are easy to use, you know. The same for titanium dioxide. They are talking about the amount of titanium as permitted, the maximum titanium that could be as part of the whole amount of titanium dioxide. I have to say that the products here are powders, which are present, for example, in your cosmetics, and only a percentage of it is present as nanomaterials. So it's important to have techniques that can separate or differentiate the total amount of titanium dioxide from the nano scale titanium only, which is what is relevant here. So there are many other regulations, many other things how there. For me, what is important to highlight here is the medical device regulation. When you look at the medical device regulation here, there are lots of words, but it's telling you that in the design and manufacture of devices containing nanomaterials, these manufacturers or that industry should take special care when using nanoparticles, and when those nanoparticles are in contact with humans, yeah? So we work very much close here in the UK with a company, and that company produces medical devices which are used in hospitals. When you have a big operation or a big surgery, those big plasters that they put on top of your wounds, you know, when you have your skin totally cut by the surgery, what they put on top, all the things will always contain silver nanoparticles as antibacterials. So they are in contact with the skins. So that industry is really doing lots of toxicological studies that, you know what I mean, to see how much of those nanomaterials go into the system, into the biological system, into your body. But also that industry produces every 2 or 3 months a batch of those devices. They send it to our lab, and we look whether these batches are stable, whether the nanoparticles haven't changed, whether they are still active as well. So lots of work for us there, keeps us really busy, but that's a way to be really useful to industry and to the UK life as well, to the UK population. So with regards to the environment, I don't spend too much time with regards to the environment here because there is no existing regulation for the environment, but there are emerging efforts from many countries, including the Danish government here, as you can see on the top, the Belgians as well. They are putting like lots of effort in writing or putting together registries of nanomaterials and or of those nanomaterials that can be brought back into the environment. You know that, for example, silver nanoparticles, which are in textiles, when you wash those textiles, they go back into the environment. The titanium dioxide that is as a sunscreen in your skin when you are on the beach, for example, goes back into the water streams. If you are bathing yourself in a river, for example, all the titanium dioxide that you are putting in your skin is going back to the river as well. So many countries are looking into this, you know, but there is nothing seriously strong on this area of environment yet. And then here we have got in Europe as well the consumer safety, protection and guidance and scientific opinions, looking, for example, at providing guidance on risk assessment of nanomaterials in the food and feed area. They look at safety assessment of active materials, like, for example, selenium nanoparticles and others when they are used in food packaging as food contact materials. But what I can see from all this guidance that they always come back, and the conclusion is, most times the conclusion is we have no conclusion because there is no methods out there. There are no reliable methods that allow us to do comprehensive risk assessment. So we need more data. So they come back most of the time with that. In some cases, like in this case that I have in the slide, they came back saying no safety concern for the use of selenium nanoparticles if they are used in this and this and this shape and mode and in this type of compound. So for the first time, I can see that that's a guidance that is conclusive, but most of the time they are not, yeah? And I'm not going to bore you with all of this slide. You can use it later on for your own information, but I'm going to concentrate on the bottom of the slide only, titanium dioxide in foods. As you know, the component E171 is titanium dioxide nanoparticles, which are added to food as UV screeners as well of the food, but also as whitening product. In 2021, there was a decision by the European Food Safety Authority saying that the use of titanium dioxide in food is totally banned, it's prohibited, because there is some data released by some academic groups stating that those titanium dioxide nanoparticles are toxic. It is worrying and it's scary because titanium dioxide nanoparticles are the main components in M&Ms, you know, the little things that we all love. I love M&Ms. I love Skittles, you know. And we eat all of that in the US and in Brazil for sure. You have all these M&Ms, as you can see here in the photo. They are full of titanium dioxide, which has been banned here in Europe, you know, but only in Europe at the moment because of toxicological concerns. Of course, as you know, the UK, in England, where I live, we are not part of the European Union anymore. So the UK did not ban the use of titanium dioxide in food, not yet, because the UK thinks or believes that that toxicological data provided so far is not robust enough or sound enough to support the banning of titanium dioxide here in the UK. So we still have to develop methods for food characterization on this vein. When we move to reference materials are extremely good things, extremely necessary things, because they help us validate our methods and ensure the quality control of the measurement that we do every day. So the thing is, like, in this area, there is a big need for reference materials from simple solutions, those materials that you put in a solution and help you calibrate your instrument. You know, in the morning when you get to the lab, you want to calibrate your instrument, make sure that the instrument offers a good performance, you know. And there are materials that can be used for method development as well. But then in the case of biological metrics, for example, a nanomaterial inside a cosmetic product, you would like to have a reference material, a like-for-like reference material that help you to do your method validation as well. So there are two streams of materials. From the first stream, we have a little bit more materials. From the second stream, we have none in complex biological matrices so far. And I'm talking in a worldwide scale. I'm not talking in Europe or in the US or in Brazil. I'm talking across the world. There are no reference materials for complex biological matrices so far. So here is a little list, very, very little list of those real certified reference materials which exist out there in suspension. We do not want reference materials sometimes that are in solids because you have to bring that material into suspension to use it through your methods, you know, in most cases. So we value very much having materials in suspension already. And here you can see that the JRC in Guild in Europe has made lots of efforts in producing colloidal silica in waters, in organic solvents. You can see there the properties for which they have been certified for as well. Of great use in our community, and maybe you are used to those materials, are the series of NIST, the NIST RM 8, 11, 12, and 13, which are colloidal gold nanoparticles with different diameters. But sadly, the 30 and the 60 nanometer materials expired in 2018, and they haven't come back to the market so far. So we don't have those materials any longer. We cannot make use of them, and they were really good materials for us to work with, yeah? NIST also released the 8017 PVP silver nanoparticles that is still in the market, and we use quite a lot, you know, 75 nanometers. And there are materials which are non-certified because they are not called certified reference materials based on the principles that they have been characterized, but they have a fantastic data on their back. Examples of those are the NIST RM 8027 for silicon nanoparticles, but also the LGC QC 5050, which is from our institute, which are colloidal gold nanoparticles that have got an assessed value for nanoparticle number concentration. They are 30 nanometer particles, and I have to say that is the only material out there in the market with a value for number concentration of nanomaterials. So we still have it in the market. It's commercialized through our LGC standards website. And on the bottom of the slides, I call your attention to this database from which I have obtained all of this information. It's a very well kept database by BAM, by the Metrology Institute of Germany. And there in that database, you can find the range of nanomaterials which are available here nowadays. So, and as I said before, no reference materials with a matrix are available so far. There were some attempts. By different projects, European projects called NanoLyze, NanoDefine. All these projects try to produce fumed silica nanoparticles, for example, in tomato soup. There was another attempt to produce silver nanoparticles in chicken paste, for example, but these materials were never commercialized as reference materials because there were problems with stability of those materials as identified through interlaboratory comparison. So there was data on those materials, labs tried to utilize them, but in the end, they never become commercially available. So again, a big gap in this area. Here, I would like to really emphasize on the value of interlaboratory comparisons. That's the only way to know or evaluate the state of the art of labs, in the characterization of nanomaterials. This is a study that LGC, we coordinated 3 years ago. This is data produced by all the metrology institutes around the world, including NIST from the US, the Japanese Institute, the French, all of them with different techniques. And as you can see, the agreement between the labs is not too bad. It's the first study of its kind looking at number concentration of nanomaterials. And I'm very proud also to say that the RSD, the relative standard deviation of the 9 single particle ICP-MS values, was within 13%, which is a fantastic value for this type of intercomparison, considering the complexity of the measurements involved here. So there are other intercomparisons that I would like to call your attention to because they are fantastic and you learn a lot from reading these papers. One pioneer in organizing comparisons is our colleague from NIST, Antonio Montoros. He's fantastic. He has a fantastic experience in the characterization of nanomaterials at NIST, and he produces intercomparison to evaluate different methods using single particle ICP-MS. You have a big platform by the European Nano-Define project. They released an intercomparison looking at the size of nanomaterials, and I think the conclusion there was like, yes, you have many methods to characterize nanomaterials, but be careful what is the measurement that you are looking at. All the techniques are not really measuring the same thing. If you use TEM, for example, electron microscopy, it doesn't measure the same type of size parameter as particle tracking analysis. So defining the measurement is extremely important. And in order to get traceable measurements for size, you have to use TEM, transmission electron microscopy. That was one of the conclusions there. And like that, you have many other ones. You see on the bottom, you have there the intercomparison for titanium dioxide nanoparticles in products as well. Fantastic paper to learn about sample preparation techniques. And our colleagues from NPL as well, next door here in the UK, organized that famous intercomparison with the gold nanoparticle from the LGC material as well, to look at the state of the art across the world, So many academic laboratories were invited to that. So before moving to the example in our lab, we shared a few last slides to complete this presentation. It would be good to take some home message here. So we're going to stop here and think from all of this that we have seen now, what is what we can learn, From all of these, from European, definitions, no matter what, if they are Europeans or they are Americans, they are Brazilian, worldwide definitions and regulations, they drive the type of measurements that we have to deliver. And of course, we have to have a focus on the needs from our countries, The regulations which are in Europe, some of them might apply to the needs that you have in Brazil, but many others might not at all, depending on the materials that you use. But number-based concentration is extremely important, concentration based on number. If you are going to measure that, use particle counting techniques. They are the best to do that, like particle tracking analysis, single particle ICP-MS techniques that can count nanoparticles on a one-to-one basis. If you use any other technique to do number-based concentration, like for example, using field flow fractionation, you will have to transform mass concentration to numbers. And to do that, you will have to really consider many parameters, which most of the times you don't know. So there are approximate techniques to do that. We still have a big problem, and it's measuring nanoparticles when they are very, very little. So for those nanoparticles smaller than 20 nanometers, there are practically no techniques or a very, very few techniques that can do that. Yeah. So this is still a problem there. And when you do your sample preparation, watch out what is happening to the nanoparticle. Can you monitor that? Are you changing it very much? Is it the nanoparticle dissolving? That's an extremely important thing to look at, And the last point that we already touched on, we need more reference materials and standards to have more trust in the numbers that we are producing to our customers as well. Here, for the few slides that I have at the end now, I would like just to go through some example of work that we do in our laboratory. And this work is done by my team. So on the slides, you have 3 photos. You have Isabel Abad, Dorota Barshak, and Susana Nunez. They did this work. So I don't get to go in the lab anymore, even if I love to. But my group did this work that you will see. And it's about how do we go about the characterization of silver nanoparticles in those medical devices that we receive in the lab using a combination of single particle ICP-MS with field flow fractionation and ICP-MS. So as I said before, silver nanoparticles are always in antibacterial medical devices. They are using wands, to dressings, as you can see in the photo on the right-hand side, PEGylated coated nanosilver is very much used on those resins, and they have antibacterial properties. These manufacturers or that industry have to comply with that ISO guidance, and they have to evaluate the risk of using those nanomaterials in contact with people. They have to. And the question that they come and knock on our door always is like, how much of those nanoparticles and how much of the dissolved silver is released into the bloodstream, because silver dissolves very much. So how much of this is in the nanoparticulate form and how much of this is as dissolved silver, which is extremely toxic too, Or is that accumulated in tissues, They cannot do those studies with people, but they do it in animals or in preclinical studies to try to understand this a little bit more. So they always come and ask for nanoparticle number, concentration, and size as determined in the presence of the real matrix. So imagine when we started doing this work 10 years ago, what a challenge for us to develop this kind of methods in the absence of reference materials. So we thought, to be able to achieve this, which is extremely difficult, we need a platform. One technique cannot do it all. We need a platform containing several techniques that will allow us to have more, to understand a little bit the numbers that we are getting here in all of this. So this is the workflow of the work in our lab for number, concentration, and size, looking at the nanoparticulate silver and the ionic silver. So for this at that time, the work with animals was a little bit more open in terms of ethical approvals and things like that. And that company used rats for those experiments, for these psychological measurements. So the poor rats were like, they had a cut in their skin, and they were treated with this plaster, with the wound plasters as containing the silver nanoparticles. They were control rats, they were treated rats, and then the blood of those rats were extracted after some dosing or number of days of that exposure, and the same with the tissues. So we got different organs in the lab, like spleen, liver, kidney, brain, and many others. So to look at the nanoparticles in blood and tissue, we use single particle ICP-MS because those particles were not too small. We use an alkaline diation method and all the quality control as possible, and that was kind of a straightforward thing to do. When they also came and they say, we would like to produce leachates of those nanoparticles in ethanol and biological fluids to see how do they get out of the medical device as well. But these particles, when they were very, very little, they were smaller than 30 nanometers, you cannot use single particle ICP-MS. Single particle ICP-MS will allow you to determine the dissolved silver and the nanoparticulate silver, but for particles which have really, really over 40 nanometers silver in this case. And when you have a lot of ionic, the limit of detection increases and increases. So you will only be able to see like bigger particles as well. So when we couldn't apply single particle, we went to the other platform. We used field flow fractionation with ICP-MS, and we could look at these very, very little particles in the leachates of these products as well. And this is a very nice thing to see and to demonstrate in this slide how sample preparation is key and extremely important here. For example, if we started putting our nanoparticles in the leachates just in ultra pure water, the first of the graph on the left-hand side, and the top row of the table, you can see that there is a second population of particles that start growing up. on the right-hand side means particles start agglomerating and aggregating. They start changing as well. If you put the particles in a surfactant only like Triton X100, you have the same effect. So you can see that the number of events in the table is really, really, really low, yeah? But the more you move towards the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that when you put there, or you combine an alkaline stabilizer with a surfactant, you can see that the particles are more stable and you read higher number of events. So, and all of these developments, you can read them in the paper that is at the bottom of the slides. We published this in 2021 already. So you can read the developments there. How did we go about blood and tissue? Something so difficult to do. Well, we bought, there are manufacturers that produce nanomaterials and they put a number to it. As a Metrology Institute, we never fully trust those numbers, but we have demonstrated over the years that the numbers are quite good. Those manufacturers have very good capability to characterize the materials that they produce, right? So we bought NanoExact 40 nanometers, a pegylated one, that is produced by one of the manufacturers, and we put a reference number to it. We have a reference methodology in our lab that allows to put a very, very accurate number concentration to those nanomaterials so that we can use them as quality control materials in the lab. And using all of this, we could see that when you just pack nanoparticles into tissue or into blood and you create your model sample, you get fantastic recoveries under that media, you know? We also did two kind of experiments. We said, okay, we are receiving from 200 to 400 samples of blood and tissue in our lab. We are not able to process them all and measure them in the same day. So let's look at two kind of experiments. What happens if you just take those samples when they get to the lab, digest them all, and put the digest in the fridge and analyze them as you can, you know, over a period of 1 or 2 weeks? Or what happens if you take all of the samples, put them in the fridge, and you extract them when you can, yeah? That was extremely important to see because when you have a high throughput and a number of samples to measure, these are things that you have to be looking at. So we demonstrated with all of this that if you do the alkaline extraction of the nanoparticle from your matrix, those digests were extremely stable, you know, for over a week, you know, and even for over a month, for both, for tissues and blood as well. But they were extremely unstable when you just kept the tissue and the blood in your fridge and extracted when you wanted or when you can. Yeah, you know what I mean? But that was something to assure the quality control of the work that we were doing. So all of these developments are also published in the paper that you have there, the reference at the bottom of the slide if you are interested. A paper of ours in 2020 as well. And with this, we went back to the customer and we provided fantastic information that was very valuable to them, you know. We went back and we could see that the number of nanoparticles increased with exposure time up to 10 days, but the same happened with the ionic silver. We were able to determine which particles sizing were present in the real blood and tissues of the rats. Here in tissue, lots of information was extremely important here. We could see that it was a big difference observed between males and females. I mean, the sex was a kind of triggering factor for differences here for silver nanoparticle accumulation. The females were accumulating much more nanoparticles in kidney, spleen, and liver, while the males only mostly in the brain. So the males got the most toxicological effect straight away from the exposure to nanoparticles. And again, for ionic silver, that is extremely important. The females accumulated the ionic silver again in those excretory organs, but males accumulated it in the testes, which was a fantastic result to give to that toxicological team of that company. And I promise that I'm finishing now. This is my last 2 slides because we are really over time. Just to say that company came back. That company keeps coming back, and they keep sending us lead shades of those dressings, of those medical devices. And we have bought nowadays a group of standards, a range of standards for nanoparticles that we buy from customers and we put numbers to it. As you can see on the left-hand side of the slide, you see a separation of nanoparticles by field flow fractionation of some standards. And on the right-hand side, you can see there a kind of fractogram of signal that you obtain for one of the dressing lead shades for silver nanoparticles as well, This is all done with field flow fractionation in hyphenation with light scattering, but also with ICP-MS to look at the silver trace. And this last slide is just really telling you that company came back and they asked us to help them with the validation of all this, our methodology complying with FDA guidelines and also complying with ISO standards and documentary standards. And we have had a huge amount of work in going through all these aspects, regulatory aspects, and how we're going to validate our AF4 methods, you know what I mean? Using different kind of materials and characterizing them to use them as quality controls. And as you can see there, the list continues and goes on about all the methods that we continue doing for that customer, just showing you the need for good measurements in the field. A few messages here in terms of the last application that we saw is that these workflows to characterize very little nanomaterials, very complex systems in very complex samples needs of a platform of techniques helping you to elucidate whether your numbers are correct. Do not use one technique if you have access to more. Of course, techniques that make sense, that's the way to be successful here. And if you don't have them in your lab, use your collaborations, which are very valuable here as well. Again, with the methods that LGC has developed at the moment, we can put a fantastic number on those manufactured materials for the purpose of using them as quality control for number concentration. You have all the details of the methods in the paper that I cited. If you would like to go for methods that allow you to analyze many samples and many samples, if a single particle ICP-MS can detect the size of your nanoparticles, then go for single particle ICP-MS. It's a high throughput technique for which you only have to dilute the sample and shoot, of course, with some quality control parameters, but it's much faster compared to other techniques like field flow fractionation, which are very good, but very tedious and time consuming as well. And then finally, I hope you enjoyed the seminar. I hope that there has been some kind of useful information that will help you in your work, in your day-to-day work in the future. With this, I acknowledge my team, the work of my team. That's a kind of recent photo that we had there in Teddington on a kind of sunny day. You can see a dashed red line around a little face there, Dorota BrJAC. That's the main scientist leading on the nanomaterial area in my group. We work very much with other European partners through European Metrology projects, which are acknowledged there, as you can see. And we are funded by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy from the government as well. So we thank them for that. And I thank you for the attention.